So, I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. Anybody who's followed me on Twitter and elsewhere knows that I'm sort of an asshole about this lately, where people are not living zero waste or even close to it. They're basically the most conscious people are still like acting like it's that mentality of I'm an environmentalist, but I'm gonna fly around on a private jet. It's that mentality that pervades a lot of circles where everybody's like woke conscious, blah blah, but they don't actually live it. They don't want to live it. They just want the recognition that comes from living it. And a lot of these people have the mentality of environmentalism, but they have it for the wrong reasons and ultimately want to enforce it by statist means. So I wanted to have as many conversations with as many anarchists who are environmentalists as possible, and one anarchist in mind, because we've talked about this both privately and publicly before, is Erica Denise Payne, who's talked about permaculture on We Are Libertarians, and who also has a blog, The Earth Nerd Anarchist, where she talks about this stuff. And that was like a year ago, but she's gotten a lot more information since then, and we'll be talking about a lot of that information. I'm going to be sharing this out on Facebook right now. And before we get into this and get too deep into this, I wanted to say that this stream is brought to you by Liberty Professionals, libertyprofessionals.com. Uh, Liberty Professionals will help you secure your home, small business, and life. It's run by a residential security expert who is an ASIS board certified physical security professional. And if you need work done in the Virginia area, they do missing persons investigations, skip tracing, and more. Contact them for more info. He has all the necessary tools in his toolbox to bring you peace of mind and stability for the future. Support Liberty businesses and get these streams by heading over to libertyprofessionals.com to get your consult today. With all that in mind, this conversation is going to be a good, productive one, I think, because there's a lot we could do better. There's a lot I can do better, and I think having the information is best. So, with that in mind, before we get into any of this, I wanted to ask you what brought you to anarchy to begin with.
Okay, so hi guys. Um, I sort of nosedived into anarchy, specifically egoist anarchism. Um, but I started out as a libertarian and or like general libertarian, somewhat okay with the LP sort of thing. Um, and then a really good friend of mine sort of coached me through egoism, and as much of an upheaval as it was, it stuck with me, and it all sort of made sense with the other things that I was doing in my life, like zero waste and minimalism and stuff like that. So really, by word of mouth, I came into this and started reading books, started talking to other anarchists and having discussions about this stuff. And yeah, that's how I got here.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I hate the statist solutions that a lot of zero waste and waste reductionist and basically hippies go about this stuff. And one of the things that I like is the idea of doing this on your own. Green anarchy, the sorts of things that you would hear about on Free Markets Green Earth, which, by the way, might want to contact you after this interview. Um,
Okay.
the the sorts of things that and yes, I unironically support a lot of what he wrote. Fucking get over it if you're squeamish about this shit. Ted Kaczynski, he wrote a lot of good stuff about this subject, where basically the whole world is headed toward an iceberg, and people are arguing about, like, they're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, waiting for it all to hit that iceberg and slam into the ocean. because we're living in an environment where consumption is driving the earth into a downward spiral. Nobody's interested in sustainability. Nobody's interested in anything like that. And when they do say they're interested, they only say they're interested so they can effectively force their other political policies through. Like, they're not interested in environmentalism if they can't have their, quote, social justice or something similar. And so there's a whole lot of, like, it's a minefield of fuck. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering primarily what got you into zero waste, and uh, what your mentality was going in, because I understand that you went into it with the mentality of an anarchist.
Yes, I wasn't an anarchist first, and really it was like a stages of evolution for myself. It was a process of self-actualization. So, my I got my ideological, philosophical stuff worked out, and then other things in my life started to align. So I moved to minimalism, and I had started feeling buried by my things. A lot of people talk about that, where
Mm-hmm.
you have so much shit and you don't know what to do with it. It's just sitting here. There's that. And then I moved to zero waste, and a lot of people do both. A lot of people are minimalist and zero waste, which is why I always like put a hash or the like dash in between the two when I mention them,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of overlap there. So I started in minimalism, and then I heard about zero waste through a TED talk, and I was
What
watching
was
a
that
video.
TED talk?
It is zero waste. It's called Zero Waste Challenge by Eric Van Cuyk. I don't know how you say that. Cuyk. And that's a heavy hitter. It's a good one. Um, it's my absolute favorite YouTube video about zero waste, and it's uh, different from other TED talks and YouTube videos and things like that, because it mentions how much money you save doing this, like
Right.
how much money, financial waste, we are contributing to. We're wasting our own finances and hard-earned money on things just to, we're spending that money and then we're just throwing it away, and there's no reason for it. And it's very unique in that way. It mentions financial waste as well, and I think that's awesome.
Well, yeah, and that's a huge thing. For many years now, I've been expressing things in terms of energy spent.
Hmm.
It's one of the few areas that I agree with the technocrats on, because the technocrats understand that there's energy potential in all action. Now, I'm not one, because I think they're dumb pocket protector nerds who think that, like, they can micromanage the planet. Their stupid bureaucracy looks like khakis to me. Like, I cannot stand it. But the point is, everything is measured in energy. Everything is a cost benefit analysis, and everything could potentially be used better, at least more optimally. And the idea of zero waste is to like minimize your impact on like the world by more efficiently using the energy you consume. Is that like about where you're coming from?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
So, in terms of that cost benefit analysis, where would somebody start in terms of getting that analysis based on rational terms? Like, what's the sort of equation here?
um hmm, I don't know where to start with that. um hmm. You, ask me again, sorry.
So basically, like, if somebody wanted to get started, what's the first piece of advice you would give them for
Oh,
developing their personal equation for cost benefit analyses?
okay. I would start with like your personal items. That's where I start. Like, or that's where I started. Start with your personal items and do it with, like, you can start with a water bottle. Start with that and think, okay, how, like, what waste am I creating by uh my need to drink water or something like that. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
much waste am I contributing to? So you have to think about the water bottle itself is plastic waste, and then the money that you spent on it that you're throwing away, you're basically throwing that away. So there's that. Then the energy you put in to earn the money to, purchase the water bottle. So buying things that are starting with your personal items, your day-to-day stuff, what you carry your lunch in, um, what you drink out of, um, what you use on your skin, that sort of thing. Start with your day-to-day items and think, how can I eliminate waste from this? Like, how can I prevent myself from throwing things away and doing this?
Right.
And then once you get used to that, then you can scale up.
Right. And one of the things I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I think in that regard, for instance, this is a very old, like maybe a year old plastic bottle. It belonged. You can't see it because I still only have one camera, but the audience can see it. This is about a year old plastic bottle. It used to belong to a Naked brand juice smoothie. And I've retained this bottle because it's about one and a half. It's about 2 liters. I think it's like 1.75 liters or something like that. I don't fucking remember. I took off the label. Um, but like the bottle, you're not supposed to reuse it. It's got, like, those things that leach out from plastic or whatever, the bisphenols or whatever.
Yeah.
But I reuse it because not only did I buy it and I don't want to waste it, but it's, to me, it comes out in the wash as to how much, like, energy I consume getting a quote better bottle that's like made of metal, that's gonna have a really narrow neck that I'm gonna have to clean out and all that stuff, and all that energy that people expend getting the quote better thing, to me, is often, it damages that equation. So you're saying that you should really have a
Oh
deep
yeah.
intuitive
And
understanding of how much energy you're expending.
right. That's why I would start with minimalism. Start there first, because you get, with minimalism, through that walk, you get a really good idea for things like that. Your things that you're particular about. So for the example, the water bottle example, um, if you know you don't like water bottles with narrow necks, don't buy one. So you can find one you do like, and then, purchase that one, or, preferably from a secondhand store.
Yeah.
But focus on things, like, you get a really good idea of what you like, what makes you happy, and then with that information you can move to zero waste. And you know that's sort of how I built my analysis of, like, I would never buy something with too narrow of a neck that I can't clean it. Don't buy that.
Right.
Like,
Well,
I would
and
never buy that.
and so then, by that token, you would also advise not being rough with things. You would say something like, you know, not only should you try to buy something that you can reuse, but you should try to buy something that you can reuse well enough for a long enough period of time that it won't be damaged and you can hand that down.
Exactly. Like, that's the focus is the most sustainable material. Like you want to go with, like, glass, metal. I stick to glass as far as, like, food goes.
The flavor
Um
is far superior.
yeah, it's way better. Glass is way better, and my headphone just fell out. Um but I would use glass and focus on the shape of it. So if you know you're going to have a hard time cleaning it, don't buy it. Um If you and I would focus on a shape container that's good, like depending on what you're using it for, something that is going to serve you for a long time. And like I have these reusable containers for meal prep,
Mm-hmm.
and they're shaped perfectly in my opinion because it's just enough, it's just big enough for exactly what I eat for lunch.
Right.
That's it. There's no like extra space. It's not a giant container, it's easy to clean, it's reusable, it's perfect for what I need. And that establishing that perfect for what you need is, important, and that's why I say start with minimalism.
So you would say there's like an equilibrium then that you're trying to reach between utility and enjoyability?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that enjoyability, don't let go of that. That's important because a lot of people will buy things and then just set them aside. Like if you don't enjoy what you're using, you're not going to use it.
Right.
That's
You,
just
well,
let it sit in the cabinet.
it's like that V for Vendetta quote. A revolution without dancing is a revolution not worth having. That sort of thing.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so okay, so on that score, then now that we've talked about like the basic mentality behind it, because there's always an ethos behind any particularly new set of action. So, uh, now that we're done with that, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the introductory sources? Like, I know you brought up that TED talk. Are there anything? Is there anything else that you might recommend for somebody starting out?
Well, okay, so we talked briefly before about Bea Johnson. I want to really emphasize you have to use your discernment. Like, I'm assuming that everyone here is already crossed the anarchist threshold. Maybe not. If not, they're, you know, but I'm catering to these people, to the people who have already crossed the anarchist threshold. You have to use your discernment because there will be people who are zero waste and minimalist and all this stuff, and they'll push legislation, and that's
Right.
not what we're about. We are not about that.
Yeah, that A
So
behind you isn't just because hot topic.
right. So Bea Johnson, all for her day-to-day manifestations of zero waste minimalism, all for her book about it, which is Zero Waste Home: The Ultimate Guide to Simplifying Your Life by Reducing Your Waste. Great book, not about legislation that she pushes. So I just wanted to put that out there before I mention these uh, resources. Like, you have to use your discernment. It's very important,
Right.
because they'll push that on you. Like, hey, we need to get this legislation going, and I'm like, mm-mm, mm-mm. We can do this without the government. We're going to do this without the government.
Well, and if you
So
can't, then you don't really give a shit. Like that's one of the things I constantly bring up. Like hashtag Who would build the roads, right? Not only do I like spit in those people's face by having a shirt for sale on my Teespring store, the Jeremiah Harding Money Hole, where it just says road hater with an A on it. Um, the like the core principle behind asking who would do the X in an anarchist society is the admittance that you won't, because you don't understand like that you could do this on your own without the state. I like people ask who would do it. I ask, well, would you? And they're like, yeah. Well, then you don't need a government. Well, but other people wouldn't. Well, then why should you be able to force them to do this? And it's sort of like that dichotomy. Now, I kind of understand where some of these environmentalists are coming from in terms of the legislatory like variety, because like there are certain things that are bad for everyone, that if you do them to the environment we all suffer. Like one of the things that recently was under discussion on this channel and on other channels is the bugaboo, which I'm not going to say the word because it like throws off algorithms, but the bugaboo that happened, like everybody's thinking bats, but they're not thinking like, hey, this place was heavily polluted already, and there are sections of China that have bad enough pollution that they need fake skies, and
right.
So, like, we're talking about a fundamentally overstressed, unhealthy people. They're going to be the hub for Bugaboo. Whatever outbreaks happen, like, they were always considered a ticking time bomb. And then it happened, and everybody's like, "Oh, we need to push regulations." But like, the people in Wuhan were having a protest about environmental shit before this happened. They were having a really long protest saying improve our environmental conditions, and they were willing to do that, but the Chinese government was physically blocking them from living better. And I think that's true in a lot of places. Like, there's this Florida place where uh, this family and multiple others were blocked from having their front yard garden because the local municipality said that you could only have it in the backyard and only in these dimensions and only these varieties of food. So the fact that they had their front yard garden was illegal and it was shut down. I think their home was foreclosed or something. And like, that's what the government does. Whenever you bring down that hammer and let them be the people behind the movement. So what I was wondering is, you say you're taking elements of B. Johnson's work. What elements are those? Like, what elements do you take and what elements do you leave?
I leave the. Let's start with what I leave. The legislation. We don't do that here. But I really like because she does talk. She touches on like reducing plastic waste.
Right.
That in the on the individual level. So that great, love that. She has a lot of tips, and which that's fine. Like it's, but I draw the line, and there's a couple of people like that, not even just Bea Johnson that
Right.
does it. Like,
Well, so on that reducing plastic waste thing, actually, that's an interesting subject because, like, the recent thing has been straws. So
mhm.
people have been saying we should replace our plastic straws with metal straws or wood pulp straws or hemp straws. What's your favorite replacement for traditional plastic?
I use a metal straw, but I understand that there are people who can't. From my understanding, there are people that have to have a straw that bends. So
Mm.
I would assume that hemp would be a really good idea.
It
And
is. It typically, like, because what I've seen from it, it has really good resilience and it still dissolves well later.
yeah, I don't like the whole paper straws are disgusting. They're
I've never
disgusting.
used one.
Don't please do yourself a favor. Do not use paper straws. They melt in your drink. Like you set the straw in your drink and it melts like wet paper.
Well, and I kind of figured that. So they don't even wax it or anything. They just sort of throw paper in there and they're just like boop.
Nope, they're just like, here's some paper that we rolled up, and we're just gonna let you stick that in your drink. It's really gross. Don't do that. Don't
Yeah,
do that. Like metal, and they're even glass. You could use glass if you're like particularly careful. Um, Hemp is good. I can't think of any others because I just use metal.
well, and that's the thing. Like, I wanted to ask about that. So you use metal, and what I'm assuming is that it builds up to that reusability point, that resiliency point that you made earlier, where you want something that you could theoretically pass down if it lasted that long, if you didn't lose it or something, or use it as a shiv. Um, so the whole, like, because when we're coming from the perspective of metal straws, metal takes strip mining. Metal takes like big holes blown in mountains that destroy the ecosystem. So I was always like, so your metal straw, you use that for the long haul, and that's the reason you can justify like taking pieces of metal from the earth for your environmentalist approach.
Yeah, well, and I mean, glass is an option too. If your cost analysis doesn't allow you to use metal, because strip mining is a big deal. I'm not okay with it,
Mm-hmm.
but we do it,
Right.
and I would prefer. But the thing is when we move toward reusable things, the less demand there is. So let's say you have, like, I end up with two metal straws,
Right.
and I can get rid of one. You can get that same straw from a secondhand store, and we create a circular economy that prevents us from needing to do more strip mining. So we can use what we have now that has already been mined. It's already been manufactured into a straw. Like, I think that if we create a circular economy, we don't have to keep digging. We don't have to keep blowing up environments and wrecking the planet.
Right.
So,
Yeah, because and like that's only to get that out of the way so that the people who might ask about that later have that information because I'm surrounded by metal. I've got metal cans over there and I've got metal in my desk, although the top surface is pretty much entirely glass. Makes me nervous whenever I hit it too hard. And there's metal in my computers and cobalt, which is a conflict mineral, is in all of our tech. So what I wanted to ask is how do you reconcile all of the things that might have some sort of environmental or like philosophically political impact on like your particular choice in goods?
well, there's very little I can't get secondhand.
Okay.
And I think that's my approach. If I ever need anything, the first thing I go to is either a thrift store, estate sale, Facebook Marketplace, ThreadUp. There's tons of secondhand resources depending on what you need. Um, there's very little you cannot get secondhand. So, um, and that's what I'm advocating here now, is that we contribute to that, is that if there is something reusable that you have that you're not going to use, pass it on. Let's keep the circle going,
Right.
because I mean, it's just going to go to landfill if you don't, like, but somebody else could use that and prevent themselves from creating a demand for new.
Right.
So secondhand is a huge deal, and you can even do like neighborhood swap meets and stuff like that
Yeah, and
if you get
like
more.
being willing to give things away is also good. Like you can give a bunch of stuff to a restorer and they can, they can have like all of their experience behind making that thing that you thought was old look new again.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, on that score, how much of what you do is that reusing thing? How much did you get from other people that was in poor condition that you personally restored, or do you do that?
Would I restore things?
Do you do that? Have you done that?
Well, a lot of what I do is that. um, Depending on, like with furniture, definitely. I would never buy new furniture. Basically, I would reupholster. I would having that's something that will aid you in buying things secondhand, being able to restore things. So,
Mm-hmm.
like furniture that I might purchase, having a general knowledge of how to repair that if something goes wrong, if there's a tear, or the wood is different, you know it needs to be sanded, like having a general knowledge of that stuff. A lot of what I do is that when I
Right.
go secondhand shopping, it's very rare that I go shopping these days anyway, but um,
Especially with Bugaboo.
oh yeah, well, yeah, that too. But I just don't need anything. Like, I have everything I need pretty much. So that's another benefit with what's going on right now. Um, you don't need you find that you need very little in this world. You need very little to sustain yourself, and yeah, taking care of, like, repairing and taking care of your items is very important, and knowing how to do that is part of the process.
So, okay, how do you know how to do that? How did you learn?
The internet. Like pretty much the internet. Like one time I had this, like I had second-handed this muffin tin, and like I think it's like made out of aluminum or something, and I didn't want to throw it away. It was like sturdy, like an old-fashioned muffin tin,
Mm.
and it was really sturdy, but it had like it was kind of like gross.
Mm-hmm.
So I like Googled how to fix this, like how to get it clean, completely clean again, and they had recommended um, like a solution of baking soda and dish soap, and so basically I did, by way of the internet, I learned how to clean this, and now it's brand new. It's like basically brand new, so I can use it forever and pass it down to my daughter. And I do that with a lot of stuff. Like the all of my baking, I have like the 13 by 9 baking dishes, and when you buy those secondhand, they're kind of grody. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to clean baked on grossness, and yeah, so the internet is a huge tool for me because I'm a millennial and I don't know anybody that, like, I don't know anybody older than me that can teach me how to do this stuff. So,
Well, and it's sort of like, it's one of those issues of patience, like if, and also the cost benefit thing. Like if you
hmm
can learn it from the internet and if you can do it effectively, then there's no point in going to a physical person and like asking them to take specifically time out of their day. And like also there's like a social ripple effect where like the more people you talk to personally, the more people you don't just get this information off the net from, the more those people can't just spread this information to a group and save the energy anyway.
hmm
So, okay, so on that score, what YouTube channels would you recommend in order to get started on restoration?
hmm. Okay, well, to be honest, the way that I have sort of come across this stuff is like an individual issue. When you're met with an issue, you find a solution, and that's I love zero waste and minimalism for that reason. I'm a problem solver. So I will go to like I'll type it into YouTube. So I don't have a specific
Gotcha.
restoration channel. It's as an issue presents itself, I find a solution for it. So if I have a table that needs to be refinished, then I will type it into YouTube, and which I already know how to do that stuff. But if I didn't, I would go to YouTube, I would go to Google, type in how to restore insert item here, and that
So
would be how
how
I
do
would do that.
So how do you know which ones of those are the most energy efficient? Do you like proverbially bargain shop before you pick a video, or
Yeah,
okay,
basically, you find I would basically bargain shop for, like, you use that discernment I talked about earlier, the zero waste minimalist, uh how do I describe that? Like a code of conduct.
mm-hmm.
You use that, and uh, use your discernment and watch videos. Try to pick up as much information as you can. Um, like if I were gonna restore a table, I'm not gonna use the same way you would if you're looking into fixing something and then somebody recommends to you a really expensive solution. You're like, no, I'm not going to use that. That's what you're doing. You're trying to find the solution that has the least amount of waste, be it plastic waste, financial waste, chemical waste, whatever. You want to keep all of that as low as you can and still achieve the same results. And you
Right.
have to remember that this item, like this table that I'm talking about, this table is going to last you a lifetime, and you're going to be able to pass it down to your children and prevent a demand for a new table being made. So it's, to me, it's worth it.
Okay, so on that score, um, like we're talking energy use. So how much energy are you willing to put in to find the right video? Like what's your limit for quality control on that score? What's your discernment?
Well, I'm I'm willing to watch as much as it takes because my goal, it serves me and my purpose to find the right solution and get this table done. Like there's I don't really have a whole lot of an issue. Like if it takes me a week to figure out the perfect solution to get this table done, so be it. Like it's that important to me, and that's my goal, is to have something meaningful to pass down to my daughter and future children. So there's not a like I don't there's not a limit for me on how much I will watch or read in an effort to get the
So
means.
on that score, the energy ratio, the sort of consumption cost and benefit analysis in your camp would be more like on a planetary scale rather than a personal scale, because you'll go as far as necessary to get to where you need to go. So that means that it's not really about your own personal energy in that score. It's about the energy that you could potentially save the planet.
Right.
Okay.
That's important. That's the if me putting in as much energy as I do to find a solution prevents future planetary destruction, I will do it. I'm not worried about it. Like I will, and it's not for the lazy. I will
Mm-hmm.
say that being zero waste and, well, minimalist is getting to minimalism, to a place where you're comfortable in minimalism, takes energy, but then after that it doesn't take energy to not go out and buy things. So
Right.
but zero waste is not for the lazy for that reason. Everything is secondhand. Most of your stuff is going to have to be restored or mended, because taking care of your items is just as important. Like, let's say you get a hole in your shirt, sew it back up. Like if
Right.
you um
And learn to sew. Like a lot of people don't
yeah,
have that skill. Like I talked about sewing something a while back, and a bunch of people were like, "You can sew things," and I'm like, "Yes."
that's badass. That's awesome.
And
Like
it's
it's so important.
well, and it's like it's a lost skill on a lot of people's part, because the culture now, I broke it. I'm gonna throw it in this plastic bag, which will be tied off, taken in a truck to a place where it's buried forever, until like eventually the earth swallows up humanity and all of its garbage problems with it. Um, you know, like Joe Rogan, for instance, brings this up a lot. He brings up the fact that we could be reusing our bones, and we could be using the whole animals, and we could be using the whole of a lot of things, but we don't, because we tie it in plastic bags and throw it in a hill. And like when you put it that way, it makes no fucking sense to not use what you can. And like, but people don't think of that. They think, I broke it, I'll throw it away and get a new one. It doesn't matter. They don't think about reusing. They don't think about planetary impact, all that shit. They just think, I want this to be this mild inconvenience to be over as fast as possible. And
That's so I'm so far away from that that
yeah,
I struggle sometimes to explain things like food waste is a whole other ball game. Like I did this one project that I posted on Facebook. So I got a bunch of produce, and I made chicken noodle soup. And then with what I used to make the chicken noodle soup, I made chicken broth, I made vegetable broth, I made chicken noodle soup, I made, you can like you can make chicken salad out of some of the rotisserie chicken. Like you can, um,
well,
like
and bone broth and bone meal bread and a bunch of things that you can just make with bones.
yeah, and like that's your mind doesn't stop at uh, consume, throw away. It's not like that. You don't have that relationship with things anymore. Like you let go of that. And that's why I'm not in that sort of space. Is like you want to think, you know, what how much more can I get out of this? So like you had said with bones, there's so many ways you can use bones, or um, your produce scraps, or like anything. You want to think like, how can I minimize waste? How can I use this to its full potential? What are other ways I can use these things that are considered waste right now? And you'll find that a lot of things have multiple purposes. So it's like those food scraps, those produce scraps, you can use that, make vegetable broth. It's delicious. So, um,
Right, like Alex the French chef on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever seen what he puts out, but he recently did a thing where he took a bunch of scraps that he might otherwise throw away. But he said, and I'm gonna fucking butcher the accent, but he said, I'm in quarantine, and he put it in a ramen broth, and he made ramen with basically table scraps.
that's
And
awesome.
and a little bit of flour. And that's the kind of innovation you can do normally. And like I know B, she like tries to live so that she only has a jar of waste at the end of the year. Are you that level yet, or are you trying to get to that level?
No, that's I'm trying to get there. And that's the thing is like it's called zero waste,
Because that's the
but
goal.
because that's the goal. And some people can get there. Her and Laura Singer, who I wrote her down for some reason. I can't remember. But anyway, oh yeah, because she has that channel on YouTube called Trash is for Tossers, and she does a whole series about the little jar and everything. I have been there before. I'm not there now because of life upheaval and all that jazz, but I've been there before, and I want to get there again. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
currently working through the process of having a 5 month old
Mm-hmm.
and getting there. So it's when people tell you kids are expensive, that's not totally a lie, but for different reasons in my mind. Like there is an initial investment with having kids, but it's nothing like what if you conventionally raise children, like with disposable everything. Um,
Consumerism. Yeah.
Consumerism, yeah. If you raise your kids that way, then yeah, kids are going to be expensive. But I'm trying to get to that jar of trash with a child. So both of our consumption equals a jar at the end of the year.
Right. Okay. Well, that's not bad. Now there's another question. This is from the chat. This is from Q Abolitionist. I had him on not too long ago to discuss the fact that he was kicked out of his local gun club because he was an anarchist. So if any of you want to listen to my negative ass and a Hawaiian gun owner talk about anarchy and shit, then feel free to head over to that video. But all that aside, he asks, coming in late, so sorry if this has been asked and answered. What is the driving mechanism for zero waste? Speaking as an anarchist, what incentive exists outside the state-inspired minimalism?
So for me, the and what I think a lot of anarchists will get out of this is the reduced dependence on corporations and the state.
Yeah,
So that's a huge thing. Like you want to well, you want to get away from corporations that are subsidized by the state and
various
therefore get
industrial
away.
complexes.
Right, you want to get away from that. So that's a benefit. And then the for a lot of people, the financial burden of living a consumerist lifestyle, um, having to work more and participate in the current corporatism system, uh, because you're reliant on disposable products, you're reliant on uh, buy, consume, dispose.
Fight Club. We work jobs we hate to buy shit we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Right. So let's not do that. So
Yeah.
that's my motive is to get away from corporations, get away from the state, get away from uh, the chains of hyper consumerism, and it makes me less anxious.
Yeah. Well, and I think reducing anxiety is one of the things, because like when you have less, it's easier to let go.
Hmm.
When you have less, to worry about, it's easier to not worry. And when you have less that you need to maintain, less that you need to take care of, less that you need to constantly buy, less that you need to work for to buy it,
Hmm.
all of those things contribute to an environment of less stress.
Yep, definitely. That's a huge benefit. Like I know a lot of people are caught in like the homesteader community uses the phrase caught in the rat race. And
Mm-hmm.
you that's this if you want to start getting away from that, this is a huge door. This is your vehicle to get to that place where you don't need as much money. Like you don't have to work to get as much money, to get as much stuff, to go back and do it all over again, rinse, repeat. You know, you don't
Right.
have to do all that because you know how to make these things. You know how to get these things secondhand. You know how to repair these things. You know how to barter for these things. Like you don't have to buy new all the time.
Right. And so on, because my my longtime sponsor and even longer time supporter, the guy who runs libertyprofessionals.com, get your consult today, Finian Cornelison, he constantly talks about trying to get off that hamster wheel and try to live your best life and be personally empowered. And I think he tries for a semi-minimalist approach too, especially considering the fact that he basically wants to live in as sustainable an environment as possible, since he rightly believes that the boogaloo might be approaching.
Hmm.
So on that score, how do you make your house boog ready and also environmentally friendly, low impact, minimalist, zero waste, that sort of thing?
Well, establishing where your weak spots are would be important. Like so you're going to need, the basics: food, water. You have shelter because we're talking about it. Um, Making sure that those heavy hitters are covered first. So for me, I like preserve food. So I do, and a variety. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Do many different ways of preserving food: dehydrating, canning, freezing, um, all that sort of stuff. Have that stuff at the ready. Have a water source. Have some water stored up. And how you store that will be based on your cost analysis, your um, the analysis that you end up coming up with. What's it going to be worth it to you to store this water in, um, and how you store it.
Yeah,
You
like
know.
I've got somebody in the really like early parts of the stream. Brett Norman says he had to start doing this, referring to reusing containers on the regular and like water and shit. He says he reuses gallon jugs for water and he uses his APU to boil water for bathing instead of paying 12 to 20 to shower. And that's an interesting concept on its own
Hmm.
because like when you use a water heater, the water like it goes places, it evaporates, it breaks through seals, it's wasted to a certain extent to keep it that warm all the time. But if you just heat it up when you need it, you can save actually a significant amount of money both on electricity and heat. You just have to be willing to do things like bathing. Now, I'm moving toward the zero, just like everybody else in the zero waste shit. But I call myself a waste reductionist for that reason, in case anybody gets confused, because I still take showers. I still
Hmm.
have plastic that I bought. I fucking went over my insane chemicals that I have over here that I use for pre-workouts and workouts the other day. So I was wondering, like, how close to that zero waste ideal have you gotten?
Um, well, I've gotten to the jar. Like I got to that jar and um, was working to get rid of the jar.
Mm-hmm.
Like to basically, I got pretty close, but I'm still now. I've been sort of set back because of life upheaval and all that stuff, and changes that have happened. So that's pretty much like peak. That's how close I've gotten to it. So I'm trying to get back there, and um, it takes time
Right.
to
Yeah. Yeah. And and
So,
and of course, like perseverance, because a lot of
oh
people
yeah,
start this sort of thing and they're like, yeah, I can do this, and then like the first frustration, they're back to consumerism. Um,
right. Don't do that.
yeah. So I have the guys behind the guy behind Free Markets Green Earth in the chat, Nicholas Picone. I've also been on his show and he's been on mine, so y'all can check that out if you want. Hashtag cross promotion. But he says statism is only bad for the environment. I wonder if you can elaborate on that. Like, what better ways do you think that anarchists can resolve these environmental issues versus the state?
By direct action and relying on each other.
So you would say that centralization plays a huge role in environmental destruction.
Yes, absolutely.
In what way? Do you mind expounding?
Um, so I'm trying to think of a good example. So we could let's take the dairy industry. Let's go there.
Okay.
So currently, and because of the what do you call it, a bugaboo?
Mm-hmm.
They're I don't know if you guys saw on Twitter, they're dumping milk out because of all this. Um, that makes me so mad. But anyway, so
Especially since everything can be fucking pasteurized, including the bugaboo. The bugaboo can specifically be pasteurized out.
yep, and they're just pouring it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is a direct result, and this is the state because big ag is fucking subsidized. Like they have to. They're demanded by the government to pour that milk out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but if we take this to a zero waste place and we produce our own milk, we state tells you to pour out your milk, you can give them the finger. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, unless they raid you like they did Rawsome Foods.
true. That's also you got to be careful with that. I ain't worried about it.
Right, right.
But
Um,
you know,
well, so on
it's
that
just
level,
the
then
benefit
you
everyone
would
else.
you would basically say that like the state is bad for the environment, and we could do much better, but we're not necessarily in the best position to do that yet because the state still exists. So you would say once we're post state, we'll be able to more accurately acquire this environment where we can better ascertain the inputs that would be necessary to get a more environmentally friendly output.
Well, I don't want to use that as an excuse to not do things now. So even like, okay, you're there are still things that you can do, like
Right.
going zero waste. In my opinion, this sort of manifests at its conclusion in homesteading. So, like a lot of what you pick up with minimalism and zero waste, it led me to homesteading, and that's very much what I want to do with my life. And I think that that's how we get over the state wrecking the planet with food waste and like produce waste and dairy. A
Oh, and
lot
those
less
fucking
waste.
bitches who like destroy homeless food drives because they're bureaucracies.
Yeah, that's disgusting. So that will go away. You can actually give away food for free if you have an abundance.
Without the
There's
tax
just
man coming for his like pound of flesh.
do what
Without the tax man coming for his pound of flesh.
exactly. Without cops stealing your money out of your wallet and such.
Or the FDA coming around and saying you're not operating with a license according to our standards.
Gross. Yeah. So that's all going to be once. But okay. So like yeah, that'll be great once that's all gone. But that doesn't mean you can't do stuff now. Like agorism.
Right. So you came through to anarchy from an agorist perspective then, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Cuz like the whole there's a quote by I think it's Milton Friedman that if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, there'd be a shortage of sand in no time. And I think that that's one of the ways to put this is that all this scarcity that they put out there to encourage the FOMO that foments the consumerist mentality of we have to buy now, we have to buy now. Like all that stuff would be mitigated by a stateless society. So what you're saying is that it would be almost immediately mitigated rather than mitigated like over time. You say that it would be an almost immediate relief effect.
Yeah, we would immediately start to see a change. I mean, because if like laws that are preventing, say, dairy farmers from giving away milk instead of pouring it down the drain, um, that goes away. They can take immediate action, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I think it will immediately um, start to see the effects of that. And direct action needs to become more popular because it's not right now. But
Right. Well, and Maggie is over here saying that's why the government made hemp illegal. It works, and the megacorps get pissed off at being replaced. So, but like George Carlin said, "quote That's the purpose that humans serve. The Earth needed plastic."
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Uh, she added the joke that, but like George Carlin said, that's the purpose that humans serve. The Earth needed plastic.
Oh my god. Yeah, so and that hemp, I really once post government, I think there will be a big boom immediately, if not sooner, because there's a demand for what hemp can do, all the different ways that we can use it. There's a huge demand, and a lot of companies are going to be moving to turn that profit. So we'll
Well,
start to see
especially when you don't have that like bullshit of like I'm gonna have to worry about transporting this because the state might accuse me of having weed on me, which is illegal.
right. Yeah, they won't have to worry about it. So then the only thing that companies, small and big, will have to worry about is meeting the demand
Right.
by any means necessary. And solutions will start turning out. Not necessarily, I'm not necessarily saying that, the whole situation is going to be capitalist, but because it's not. But a lot of problems will be solved almost immediately.
Right. Right. So on that score, um, first off, what zero waste slash minimalist people would you suggest that are more anarchists?
That's very difficult. I recommend checking out my blog. Because I don't know of any in the areas that I've looked in. I don't necessarily know of any that are anarchist. They either don't speak about politics or uh, they push for legislation, and I've
Right.
had to use my discernment that we should all use.
Because I know like there's the Joel Salatins of the world who wrote that book Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal, which was like a children's book about how bureaucracy interferes with farming, and I liked that a lot. And he's also a big like sort of permaculturalist, and he wants people to live closer to the land. And I know you're big into that, so like maybe you would heard of Joel Salatin, but any of the like, so you can't really think of anyone who's like big into reducing government as much as waste.
um, Not really that I maybe I just haven't looked in the right places. I mean, I'm sure that there are, because I've got like resources on like permaculture and um, zero waste, minimalism, all these things that sort of tie in, homesteading, gardening, but no one that I know of that specifically speaks out against the government as loudly um, as they do reducing waste and all these things.
Well, then a lot of people are scared fucking shitless because they don't want to get compared to Ted K.
Right. And that's unfortunate. So I think that's where I'm trying to fit in is I want to, and I've talked with you specifically about creating a YouTube channel and talking about this stuff. Like I want to fill that. I want to be that person that, and I'm a bit nervous about it, but I want to be that person that speaks up and says, no, we need to be just as much against the government as we are against plastic waste, against corporations being subsidized. Like we need to,
Right.
there needs to be a balance. And I want to be that person. That's what I'm trying to do. So I have my blog and I'm working on starting a YouTube channel and stuff like that to be that person because I don't know. And
Okay.
nobody, and maybe that's just me not looking in the right places, but I just haven't seen it.
Okay. So I guess like a good close to closer, but we're not quite there yet. Is what resources would you recommend for getting into this sort of thing? Like I know we talked about like Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle, and like I know we talked about Bay, but anybody else?
Yeah, so I would definitely look into where I started the Zero Waste Challenge TED Talk by Eric Van Kuke. I don't know how you spell that. I didn't know how to spell it earlier either, but it's called Zero Waste Challenge TED, and it's a TED Talk. I can't remember. It has the location on it, but Eric Van Cuyk is where I started, and it's amazing. Laura Singer, Trashes for Tossers series on YouTube. There are a couple of documentaries that you can check out. I have a list here. It's one of them is called Bag It. It's a guy follows the life cycle of plastic bags. Um, then Clean Bin Project. This couple moves to zero waste in 1 year. Like they're living the zero waste lifestyle for a year, and it shows their journey through that and where they end up. And then that same couple did one called Just Eat It, where they refused to buy anything from the grocery store for 6 months, and they um, dumpster dive for their food. And I think that is so freaking cool. Um, there's No Impact Man, this man in New York City, and his family. Um, they live without electricity, car, and some other resources, and basically take zero waste to the next level. Like once you've sort of gotten all of your day-to-day items, like your food situated, your clothes situated, what you use in the bath, your at home stuff. Once you get that done, then you can sort of move up and try to cut down your resource, like electricity usage, how much you drive, how much water you consume, or things like that, like the
Right.
upper crust zero waste. And he really goes through that. So it's called No Impact Man. Um, so that's good. Let me see what else I have down. Uh, and then I have the books, Zero Waste Home: The Ultimate Guide to Simplifying Your Life by Reducing Your Waste by Bea Johnson, and A Zero Waste Life by Anita Van Dyke is worth checking out. Again, use your discernment for any legislation spoken about or pushed. Um, but that's a good starting place. And then once you get through all that, then just type into YouTube, type into Google, type into Tumblr. You can, like, everywhere, every social media site, every where I've looked has something to do with zero waste and minimalism. Like even Reddit is like a heavy hitter with information on this stuff. And like there where I learned, like Reddit's where I learned about dumpster diving. Like I have one specifically to talk to other people who dumpster dive because that's like a side interest I have.
So
So
because of that, and because I know there's a stigma attached to that, and all of this really, let me ask: you have a kid. How concerned are you that the government will do with your kid what they've done to many others and say that you're an unfit parent because you're not being, quote, sanitary, or you're not you're not on the grid, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? How much have you thought about that, and how does that affect your mentality and approach?
well, I'm very much, I mean, the I've already met resistance with being different.
Right.
Because I use cloth diapers. I use reusable cloth wipes. I use cornstarch instead of baby powder. Like I've already, I keep my daughter's wardrobe very minimal. She doesn't. She first of all, she's not really into toys. But then, like, I do have some like wooden cars for her, like some eco-friendly toys, and she's not really into it right now. But maybe later. But I've already gotten crap for being that way, or
Mm.
and for trusting my gut over like immediately rushing my daughter to the emergency room for the sniffles. Like I've already met resistance with that, and I am concerned about it, but it's not going to stop me. i'm
Mm-hmm.
not I'm not willing to compromise. So
So, okay, how would you convince other parents to do that? I mean, I know you've got the Serene Heart Syndicate that you just started up, and you're trying to get that some traction to convince people that there's a community of people who could be helpful in that regard, who could help that sort of like mentality of cohesion and not just submitting to the authorities. How do you get other parents to do that? Because everybody's fucking cowardly these days. Everybody's fucking craven.
well, from what I've experienced, it's people that they are interested, they have a relative interest, but they're afraid to make that jump. And seeing other parents that do it is a big deal. Like and that's why you got to live it. Like I live that life to be an example for those parents. You don't have to be afraid. Like people can threaten all they want to that, they're going to call CPS or they're going to, but you're not harming your kid. This is not harmful to children. This is
Right.
better for children. So let them call CPS. What are they going to, um, or like tell them to do it. Basically, like you have to meet them with their same level of aggression. But I try to be an example, show them that it's not hard. It's actually way easier. It's better for your child to use reusable options. It's better to contribute to a circular economy, especially within the syndicate. That's what I'm trying to develop, is a circular economy within the syndicate that I've made, so that no matter who comes through my door, I have what they need. Like I have glass baby bottles. I have a set of cloth diapers for them. I have a set of clothes for them. I have, you know, um, cloth wipes. I have cornstarch. I have, I want to be able to give people in need what they need. And that stuff's expensive on a hyper consumer level. Like if you're buying diapers, disposable wipes, you're buying cheap plastic bottles that suck. You're buying like um and then you're on top of that buying clothes, and like a lot of parents buy way too many toys for their kids, and they're all plastic, like plastic ridiculous noise making toys that cause overstimulation and craziness. So visual clutter, like you will save so much money, time, energy, everything doing it this way. So that's why I try to live that and talk about it to get people comfortable, get people interested, let them know that it is safe, it is okay. People can be, the Karens of the world can be weird if they want to, but there's more. It's not just you. There's more of us out here that are living life, and I want to help with that. I want to give more people that opportunity.
Well, right. And so, like, especially during Bugaboo, I tweeted this thing out. Tips for a strong immune system: stay indoors, avoid sunlight, be sedentary, avoid those you love, stay in one place, don't work out, don't have sex, stay away from all pathogens, kill all bacteria, and eat processed foods. Wait, I meant tips for a weak immune system. I think, especially now, a lot of people are overly concerned about health to the point where they're being counterproductive to that end. And I think, especially, like, if you want to flatten the curve, don't panic and go to the hospital because you coughed. Because the hospital is currently, like, allegedly. I mean, there's hashtag empty hospitals for the skeptical among us, but allegedly the hospitals are overstuffed right now, and allegedly the system is overloaded. So why people would go in there for what could be frivolous is beyond me if they actually care. But ultimately, I think a lot of people don't give a shit, and that's why we're in this situation to begin with. So my question is, how do you get people to give a shit? Because right now, the reason we live in this consumerist mentality is because people have been told it's acceptable. So how do you get them to understand that it's unacceptable and potentially even damaging and counterproductive?
To follow the weak immune instructions.
Well, to live in this consumerist bubble.
Okay, okay. Well, usually spending time with people, showing them, okay, you're having this problem. This is why. Like, and give them. You have to sort of give them the zero waste minimalist spiel. Like, okay, you're having this issue. If you were to switch to this reusable option, or if you were to get it from a secondhand store, it wouldn't be as expensive. You got to find the problem that people are having and solve it. Like, explain
Right.
to them how to solve it, and then sort of that sort of eases them into everything else in their lives, how they can solve that problem. Like, oh, you're always spending, and like with other parents, like, oh, kids are so expensive. I've been, diapers and wipes are so expensive. What do I do? Hey, reusable diapers, reusable wipes, cornstarch, not baby powder. It's also better for you, um, or better for baby. You
Unless, of
have the
course,
problem.
baby has a natural sensitivity to corn, but that's extremely
Right,
rare.
right. That's yes. Don't use cornstarch if you have an allergy. But anyway, um, that's just my solution because my kid doesn't. But like, you have to find the problem and constantly be in that problem solving mindset. Is you find a problem and you solve it with as a zero waste option. So, um, and that's how I've gotten people to consider it. Like,
So,
finding that problem. Like, I see you're having this problem. Have you considered this solution?
so what do you do with the people who appeal to expertise,
Um,
who appeal to authority, who say that, well, how can you give me this advice? Who are you to do this? Like that sort of snooty fucking Karen mentality. How do you appeal to those people, or are they a lost cause?
um, I mean, really, I just sort of I don't react to it, to the world. Like, if you're gonna eventually come to this. I think it's inevitable. A lot of us, specifically in our age group, the millennial age group, like, we're all moving toward eco friendliness. Like, I know very few that are resistant to it, and I think that eventually they won't. Like, the Karens and you know the people that are sort of set in their ways. I don't think they're gonna have a choice. This is where we're going.
Right.
So, and I don't feel like it doesn't serve me to meet those people with aggression, with the same level of aggression or Karenness that they meet me with. So I just do what I do, and um, if they don't like it, whatever.
So it's sort of one of those be the change situations then. It's where you're trying to manifest what you think would be the appropriate methodology, and if they like the results, you say, here's how I got here.
Hmm. Yeah,
And then
definitely be the
if
change.
and then if they ask you personally how to solve a problem, have one ready.
Right. And
Okay.
that's sort of my uh, as someone who talks about this on the internet, like, I kind of I have to have solutions at the ready, or at least a way that they can find a solution. And it's definitely not for the lazy. And it's the same, it's like unschooling people on zero waste, minimalism. You have to always have something to toss in somebody's way to disrupt their normality or whatever, normalcy.
So you emphasize like a breach of cognitive dissonance then.
Hmm.
Okay. How do you get past that easily? Or is there not an easy way?
Um,
Maybe a case by case thing?
Case by case, yeah.
Yeah. It depends on the person. Okay. Well,
Depends on the person, depends on what they're open to.
well,
So,
speaking of depending, we have a question from Hody Johns. I wonder what she learned about green anarchism and or gardening with changing climates when she moved to different states with different climates.
oh yeah, so you have to keep in mind your hardiness zone. So, the like here in Washington, the growing season is way shorter uh, than it is in like say Georgia, which is where I just moved here from.
Yeah, you
Um,
can't grow peaches here.
I wouldn't recommend it. Definitely not. So keeping that sort of stuff in mind, it's important. Keeping in mind your first and last frost dates. Keeping in mind your climate, what sort of stuff other people are growing. Um, Making sure you're growing. What's the word? It was right here. Uh, Not hybrid.
What, permaculture?
Yeah, like the not hybrid plants.
What?
Another H. The type. It's the type of.
Oh, horticulture?
No, it's like there's two different types of tomatoes. There is hybrid tomatoes and
Heirloom.
heirloom. There you go.
Gotcha.
I could not think of it. Making sure you're growing heirloom plants is important. That sort of thing. But as far as how the means that you grow things, like how you execute permaculture, um, there's not a whole lot that's different to me.
Right.
And living in different, I've lived in all different parts of the country, like Arizona, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Georgia, I've lived here in Washington. Um, Keeping those things in mind, they're the basics of permaculture and just gardening in general is um, pretty consistent across the board. It just looks a little different because your last frost date in New York is going to be different than in Washington and Georgia and Arizona. Everywhere is different,
Right.
but you still need to know the basics in your area, and you can uh, look that sort of stuff up on Google.
So, how would you advise maintaining soil richness during a frost?
Um, by keep it so I do like during a frost. Okay. So keeping it like I would do like chop and drop. Like that's my jam. Is like keeping the soil um like during your growing season, making sure lots of like compost, lots of like airing the soil, doing a lot of that during the growing season, and then during the frost. Um, there's not a whole lot you can do, but keeping the compost going, keeping the like turning the soil sort of thing. Well, it depends on what you're really depends on what method you're using. Um, because there's like the no dig method that Charles Dowding does that you really don't have to do that. So it depends on what you're it depends on what method you're using. But
Well,
for
so what's
me,
that no
I
dig method?
the so Charles Dowding on YouTube, he also has a lot of books. He's like one of the pioneers of permaculture. Like the dude is solid, great resource. Any of his books, any of his YouTubes, like, and he doesn't push legislation. Not that he would, but you know what I'm saying. Um, but he does no dig. So basically, he creates these square um, grow beds, and he fills them with soil, and then steps on it, like steps on the soil to sort of pack it down,
Mm-hmm.
and then he doesn't touch it. Like he puts his plants in and then doesn't touch it after that. He just lets the plants come up as they will. And he ends up having like beautiful produce at the end. And it's very like um, low energy, low work,
Low
low
impact.
input. Yeah, like very cool stuff that he does. And he's got he has like two different compost setups that he just like lays things on top of it. So like if he were to do chop and drop, like he would just lay the grass and the weeds or whatever he clipped, he would just like lay that on top of the soil. You don't dig to mix it in, you don't, you just lay it on top. And it ends up being a layering system of like the compost seeps into the soil. The nutrients you get from the grass clippings seep into the soil instead of you having to mix everything up and mess with the like microorganisms and things like that, like worms. You don't want to mess with them too much, and it creates a healthier soil. At least from what I've seen of his work, it creates beautiful soil.
Okay, so I've got two questions in chat. Opie fucking Taylor says, would it be better to grow more in the summer and freeze for the winter, or grow year round with an inside garden for the winter?
So, and it's also worth considering. You can grow frost hardy plants, so you don't have to necessarily stop growing in the winter, depending on what your climate is like. Like in Georgia, you can get away with frost hardy plants. I don't know about. I've never personally done that in Washington or like somewhere where it snows really heavily. But if you can get away with it, I would try growing frost hardy too. But yes, I would do year round. Like I don't have a greenhouse right now, but if I did, I would grow year round. Um,
Gotcha.
and just like build one out of like reusable or not reusable, like reclaimed materials. Like my grandparents built one out of shower doors they found on the side of the road,
Mm.
and I would do something like that. And I've seen one on this channel that I watched called Roots and Refuge that they built one out of windows, like just windows, and put it together, and it's beautiful, like the most beautiful greenhouse I've ever seen in my life, and it's just windows.
Gotcha. And I've got another comment saying Ruth Stout's no-till gardening. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a heavy hitter. That's a big one. So, no-till gardening, no dig, similar, but um, and then there's also hugel culture, and there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of information in permaculture and how this can manifest. So, yeah, no-till is a big method.
Yeah, because I understand that tilling releases a lot of the trapped gases, and like it damages the nitrogen fixation, and it creates a lot of these problems that wouldn't exist if you just did what nature does and just throw the seeds on top and wait for them to sink down, wait for that like because there's anybody who doesn't know about seeds, there's like the shell, there's the food for the seed, and then there's the actual embryo for the seed. And that's why a lot of the time you'll see people like shaving a part of the seed off, or like scrubbing it with some sandpaper or some shit in order to get like the embryo to have a way out through the shell, to get like further out. Like a lot of people just drop it in acid of some sort. Um, but a lot of people who want this on the surface thing, that they'll damage the shell slightly before they throw it out. Is that what you do, or you advise, or do you advise a more natural sort of like let it run its course approach?
I would advise let it run its course. I don't do that.
Okay.
So yeah, like definitely let it take its own course. I mean, if that's your thing, I don't cost benefit analysis. I'm not doing it.
Right.
Like I'm not into it.
Q says, I'd be interested, and by the way, not Q as in the Q-Tard Alliance who supports Trump, Q as in the guy who got kicked out of his gun club for being an anarchist, says, I'd be interested in seeing the demographic breakdown of this movement. I wonder if this is a more masculine or feminine movement, strictly for curiosity purposes. I would guess female, because I've seen many more females involved in this movement, and because typically, and this, I don't know, fucking call me a fascist if you want, I don't give a shit. Uh, this sort of subject is typically overwhelmingly feminine because men are out doing things like, fucking working the roofing jobs and the engineering shit and the mining and shit. Typically, this sort of field will be dominated by women simply for the purposes of like having something to do while making the home.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely female driven right now, and I think by proxy, men will also end up being zero waste as well. So, I mean, there are some men like that make videos on YouTube, that make blogs that talk about it. But it's much harder to find,
Right.
and I that's why I try to appeal to both. Like I don't want people to just feel like I'm only talking to women, because I think everybody should take this on.
Right. So sort of like Joel Salatin doesn't want to just appeal to men.
I'm sorry, what?
Sort of like Joel Salatin doesn't just want to appeal to men.
Who is that?
Oh, he's that everything I want to do is illegal guy. I'll send you a
Oh,
PDF of
oh,
his
oh, yeah, yeah,
book.
yeah. Yes, please.
Because he's been in Reason magazine interviews, and he's basically just a farmer who hates the government. So,
I
um,
love that. I didn't
so
even know this guy.
yeah, I think you'd like a lot of what he puts out. He's got a wife and kids, and he tries to live his best low government life.
Okay, I've
So
heard of it, but I haven't actually read it.
yeah. Well, and that's only one of his books too. It's just his most famous one because it's like somewhat like okay for kids to read. And I say that because like a lot of people get squeamish when talking about like raising kids in that environment, which honestly would be an interesting discussion on its own, like how to avoid seeming like a dirty propagandist while also being an anarchist parent. Of course, I don't have a problem being a propagandist. I specifically said my site is designed to be a propagandist site. Like I set up everything to be heavily uncomfortable and extremely off-putting for that reason because I want to trigger people's innate little like lizard brain to like be like, oh, maybe we shouldn't like the government, maybe we shouldn't do what they say. But
Well, I try not to, and I still get called that. Like, I still get called insane, and I try to be like tame and like ease people into it, and I still get people like, "You're insane!
mm-hmm. Of course,
You're
that's
being
probably
too harsh on people."
because they're like used to the image people like me put off, and then they're like, oh, I guess all anarchists are like this. Fucking anyway.
No.
Another question. I asked a question about driving. Don't know if you saw it or addressed it already. I'm gonna look up here for that question. He says earlier he said the boogaloo gets started after they raid zero wasters who refuse to pour out their milk. That's an amusing concept. In regards to driving, how do you minimize your amount of waste there?
Driving. So, basically using like walking more places, carpooling, um, living close to your work sort of thing, or like you could work from home. That's also an option. So, just any way you can. It's not like a be all end all. If there's not much you can do with that, it's just trying. So if you can carpool to work with people, if you can cut down on your driving, like to recreational driving, cut that down. If you can um, reduce your commute in any way, that sort of thing. I mean, there's not a whole lot, but just cutting down in those ways, it does a lot.
Right, because like there's a thing with that. Like I always bring this fucking thing up where people act like because they drive a hybrid or an electric car, they're suddenly a fucking hippie environmentalist when they don't realize that this lithium shit came from conflict as well. So did the cobalt that goes into the computer elements, and all this stuff is non-biodegradable stuff that is extremely bad for the environment, worse than oil in the long run, and people don't care because they get to feel like they're doing something better. And like the electricity comes from coal and petroleum and all this shit. So you would say, would you say that there is a superior form of transportation in the form of driving, or would you say that it comes out in the wash?
I would say it comes out in the wash.
Yeah.
If you're gonna travel, if you can use public transportation, I saw somebody. I think didn't somebody like shit on you for using public transportation? But
Yeah.
literally, like as someone who's been doing zero waste for as long as I have, like use public transportation. Just be careful with all this going on right now. Like, but that's really what I would say. It's like the best way to carpool.
Right. Yeah, well, and also like not only is it the best way to carpool, but it also blocks up traffic less, which keeps people out of their cars, out of idling more. So it's generally better for that impact anyway.
Yep. And so there's that. Um, Less gas is used, less oil is used, less, in general, we're focusing on one bus to, or however many buses are in a city. I think my hometown has like three. There's like three buses, and they all go to like these major points in the city. It's nothing like here in Washington. Washington has this huge network of public transportation.
Right.
If you can use it, use it. If not, I would recommend doing like you can do ride share things. Like I think Uber has where you can share a ride, and Lyft has an option where you can share a ride. That would be cool, but it's kind of iffy getting people comfortable with that, sharing a ride with somebody. But carpooling is a big one. Less
So
cars on the road.
so you would recommend for a lot of this stuff then maybe forming networks because like we're talking about it's hard to get people to carpool with people they don't know, but if you could just carpool with people you know, then that would solve the problem. Like just know people, talk to your neighbors, um, get involved in local anarchist groups, that sort of shit.
Yeah, definitely. That's really important. Like when I spent not that long in Georgia, like I wasn't there very long, and I had a ton of people around me that were not that they weren't that far away that and granted I couldn't like I didn't work out a carpooling situation, but there were other ways to network. And talking to your neighbors, like maybe don't like push anarchy immediately, but but talk to your neighbors and um, see what you guys can work out about carpooling or exchanging resources. Like there's that app, what's it called, neighborhood or something, where people will look within their neighborhood to get work done on their house, like handyman work, or hey, I'm giving this away. Does anybody need it? There's also the Buy Nothing groups. You can check into those. They're not very popular in the Southeast, but working on it,
Well, of course, the
It's really
South has
important.
this inherent aversion to a lot of this stuff, which is fucking stupid. Since,
Hmm.
so they've got this aversion because them damn hippies and Yankees, and they
Yeah,
all,
the fruits and nuts.
but they also simultaneously hate government. So it's like this stupid contradiction, where like a lot of these people down there hate government, but somehow still find themselves okay with accepting its dumb standards for how to interact in society, because freedom or something. So how do you get through to those people?
It's sometimes it can be like pulling teeth, but living the life is a huge thing. Like living that anarchist life, you have to find a balance, and it depends on the people, how you know them. Um, like some people are more inclined to listen to what you have to say than others. Like obviously you're not going to get through to big yee truck, American flag, you know, that sort of personality. Like it's going to be very hard to get through to some people, but and you do see a lot of that. You see a lot of yee trucks and, you know, America. So just being trying to be flexible, remain flexible, and understanding that these people haven't gone through what you've gone through yet. The uh, mental labor to get to where you are in anarchy. But yeah, it really it just depends on who you're talking to, and then I think by way of uh, like with zero waste and stuff like that, like they're gonna eventually have to wake up anyway. So it, you
Right.
know, you're basically just trying to gently wake people. As far like the southern crowd, and yeah, it just depends though.
Yeah. So we've got one comment from Finian, the sponsor of this episode. The batteries is one reason I prefer micro hydro over solar. I need power at night and in lousy weather, and the batteries are terrible for the environment, not to mention their expense.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so in general, where would you like to see people go um, in terms of this zero waste? How do they get started, and how far should they go in the immediate future?
I want I want to see people go as far as they can comfortably. I don't want people to go without. I don't want you to go without what you need, but I want to see people go as far as they can. That's the most important thing to me is that we get started now so that when the big luau happens and, you know, all of that post state stuff happens, it's not such a shock to lose that stuff. Like, um, we're not reliant on things. Like, I want to see everybody sort of move that direction, move to as close to zero waste as you can get in the time that we have left. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But don't like, I don't want you to put yourself in a bind or like go without food or something ridiculous, you know, like don't go without, but like start now and look at ways that you can reduce your waste.
So basically, consumerism is a drug. Don't quit cold turkey. You might relapse.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, with all that in mind, I think this was a very productive conversation. Where would you like people to start, and where can they find you?
Start as far as what? Like
Zero waste and
there.
minimalism.
Okay. Well, you can start on my blog if you want to. I make posts about zero waste, minimalism, permaculture, earth nerdy things. My blog is called The Earth Nerd Anarchist. You can start there. You can check out the. I had cited a few documentaries. You can start there. Um, Earlier in the video, I had talked about them, and I'll also put up links for all this stuff. Like I'll link to where you can find all of this stuff. Um, you can start with A Zero Waste Life by Anita Van Dyke. You can start reading if you want to. Um, and you can find me on pretty much every social media site under The Earth Nerd Anarchist or Erica Denise Payne.
Gotcha. All right, cool. So, any final messages for the audience before we wrap this up?
Um, Hope you guys are having a good day.
All right. Well, I guess my last thing then is understand your impact, understand the energy you might be wasting that could go to be improving your life, understand the impact that you have on the future and what you might have to explain to your kids, and try to live your best life so that you can avoid being the person that you have to tell your kids was the reason things are the way they are when things get bad.
I like that. I'm with
And
that.
yeah,
I double that.
kill the cop in your head and free your mind. Smash the state.